What's up guys, Demeter 1, 2, and 2, and it's Top Tuesday once again. And in Top Tuesday tradition, we are continuing our series looking at all the best cards and all of the main sets in the game of Yu-Gi-Mans. And the set we are up to today is Pharaonic Guardian. Pharaonic Guardian. I don't know if that's a real word, but that's what the set's called. Ah, yes, I remember this set very, very vividly when I was a child because it was the one set that actually felt super Egyptian. We had like scarabs and locusts and gravekeepers and zombies and mummies. This felt like an Egyptian themed set, which was cool because that was the whole shtick of the anime, despite the fact that most of the cards really don't have that kind of theme. It felt the most Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess. And as with all these old sets, half this list is going to be nothing but limited and banned cards because that just seems to be what they did in these old sets, make broken stuff. Now I actually am really curious to see what set it takes before we get to at a set where there actually isn't a banned card in it whatsoever. I bet you anything it's not till GX. Maybe. But as always, the rules of this list that we're going to do our best to adhere to, unless we just absolutely can't for a particular card, is we're going to try to look at the set in a bubble and assume that all the cards in the game are only these 100 cards or so, so that way we can really rule out some really cheesy stuff, as well as eliminating anything that I might be unaware of. Like, you know, this card was super relevant for one format 5 years later because of something random that no one remembers except one jerk in the comments. But we do have to look at outside cards once in a while because sometimes they're just too obvious or just too good and everyone knows it, so it would be unfair to eliminate them simply because they have no function now. But anyway, let's get started with number 10. Number 10 is Lava Golem, a secret rare in the set. Ah yes, Lava Golem, the boss monster of all the burn decks. You cannot normal summon or set this card. You can only special summon him by tributing 2 monsters your opponent controls, and then you special summon it to their side of the field. That's an inherent condition. In every standby phase, you take 1,000 damage while you control this monster. But because you've given it to your opponent, that last thing is actually now talking to the controller of the card, not you, the owner of the card, so your opponent is the one taking the burn damage. Why is this card relevant? You're giving your opponent a 3k beater, and 1,000 burn damage a turn really isn't that big of a deal. With a 3k beater, you can probably OTK your opponent before it'll ever burn you to death, so why do we care? Well, it's because its summoning condition that allows you to tribute 2 monsters is pretty much unavoidable. Like with modern kaijus, tributing an opponent's monster for the cost of a summon is something that's really kind of unavoidable. You don't telegraph it, you don't activate the card in your hand, you don't say, alright, I'm going to use Lava Golem response. Nope, you could just say, alright, Lava Golem sack 2 special summon response. And it's that kind of untargetable, unstoppable removal that, you know, only can be avoided by preemptively flipping something like Mask of Restrict, or no, Zombie World wouldn't work because that's only for Tribute Summon. But the reason why he doesn't see much play anymore is because, like I said before, we have modern kaijus which don't lock you out of your normal summon for the rest of the turn like this thing does, and even if you do have to use your normal summon for something like Sphere Mode's removing 3 instead of 2, and you can remove 1 on your side of the field in order to actually to get that kind of out of the way, so you can actually make your Sphere Mode thing. So we do have cards that do it better now, but it would be kind of silly not to mention Lava Golem because Lava Golem was the original, you know, tribute your opponent's boss monsters card. Number 9 is Terraforming. Yeah, Terraforming is that old. Terraforming is a normal spell card that reads, add 1 field spell from your deck to your hand. There's no once per turn clause on this, there's no any activation condition whatsoever. This thing is a solid rota for field spells. It has been mentioned time and time again that maybe perhaps with the advent of field spells becoming almost some of the best cards in people's decks, that maybe Terraforming should see a hit on the ban list like it does in the OCG, and we have to start using more suboptimal ways of searching them with something like Metaverse or Planet Pathfinder. But I'm a big proponent of Terraforming because screw you guys, I want to play my field spell and I don't want to have to deal with some dumb trap card in order to search it. Just let me have my Terraforming. You already took my Ancient Fairy Dragon. You guys are a bunch of jerks. Let me have my Terraforming. This card's broke. As a generic field searcher, it's one of the better cards you can have in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! As well as any time in Yu-Gi-Oh! Whenever there was a field spell that was relevant. And I am a big proponent of saying if the field spell's the problem, hit that. Don't hit Terraforming because that hurts everyone else. Stop it. There isn't much to say about Terraforming other than it's just really good. And I don't know, it doesn't get rarity bumps well. Yeah, the artwork's kind of dark with all the space and everything in it, so whenever it's like secret or super or or whatever. It's really hard to even tell, so you know, it looks just as good as a common. That's kind of sad, I guess. But that's a really nitpicky nitpick. Number 8 is one of the best targets for terraforming, Necrovalley. Now, if I wasn't adhering to my rule where cards that are on the Forbidden Limited list get bumped up the list, Necrovalley probably would be closer to number 1, simply because it is a fantastic field spell. Also, the Gravekeepers came out in this set, but this is not going to be the representation on the list, or their only representation on the list, only because Necrovalley does have use outside of the Gravekeeper deck. Sure, Necrovalley gives all your Gravekeepers 500 attack and defense, but no one gives a flying fuck about that effect. None. Even the Gravekeeper deck doesn't really care about that. They care about the other things this card does. Cards in the graveyard cannot be banished. Ooh man, this is a floodgate field spell, meaning it's super searchable with your terraforming, and any deck that needs to banish from the graveyard, like your zombies with Mizuki, can't use their effects. Negate any effect that would move a card from the graveyard to another place. So this card obviously turns off all kinds of banishing, but if there's any other kind of effect that maybe like moves a card from the graveyard to the deck, or a card from the graveyard to the field, or wherever, this says, no, you can't even do that. We just want to turn off banishing by name, but you also can't do anything else that involves touching stuff in the grave. And the recent erratum of this card actually added one more effect. Any cards that would change types or attributes of cards in the grave, those are negated as well, so this thing actually hard counters Zombie World. And this is kind of why I think this set is so cool. There was 2 opposing decks built in this set. You have the zombies with their graveyard resurrections, and you have the Gravekeepers with their stop being zombies. And it was just really cool that we had 2 opposing, like, knocking head decks in one set and managed to still be kind of in the same theme, you know what I mean? I think it's cool. But because this card has applications far exceeding the limitations of being in a Gravekeepers deck, I gave it its own slot, and then Gravekeepers, they get one down the road, so don't worry. Quick note before we go to the next one though, if you're ever going to use this card as a side deck card or a main deck card or wherever you're going to choose to use this card in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, remember to keep a modern copy of the card on you, whether it's in your just like in your binder or whatever, but you need it on you, or a piece of paper with the actual effect on it, because this thing has been errated 7 times, so that means there's 8 versions of this card floating around. So if you don't have the modern one, the most up-to-date, you know, someone's gonna argue, you're gonna bring over a judge, it's gonna waste a bunch of time, it's a big pain in the ass, so just make sure you know what it does completely, and you have a modern erratum on you somewhere so that you can prove to the judge, because sometimes judges make bad calls. They should know Necrovalley is a problem card for this, because it's been rewritten so many times, but still, it makes it easier. Talk about a card getting an errata. Ring of Destruction. Here we go, one of the first limited cards on the list. This is a semi-limited, currently at 2 when at the time of recording this video, and I wasn't exactly sure how to put this on the list anyway, even if it was at 3, simply because the card's effect was drastically changed, and this is, I think, one of the first instances where we're running into this, where a card was actually quite good in the set that it was released, but it's been since changed so drastically it's now hard to place. Originally, this card just lets you destroy one monster on the field and both players take burn damage equal to the attack of that monster killed. The reason why this card got put on the ban list and then it's been slowly taken off and then eventually errated was because it led to a lot of draws. Because if you both had, let's say, 3,000 life points and you gave your opponent that lava golem and then you pop it with this thing, you caused a draw. Or if you had 4,000 life points, your opponent only had 3, you can really super cheese a win with this card, because it does exactly the damage that the monster's attack is, and we can make some really big monsters in this game, so this can do a lot of burn damage. Do I think that would be a problem nowadays? I don't really think so. I don't know. I feel like it didn't need an erratum, but okay, fine. What does the errata change it? The errata makes it so you can only use this during your opponent's turn, which isn't super awful. It is a trap card, so you probably weren't going to use it during your turn right away anyway, so that's not super inconvenient. Target one face-up monster your opponent controls, so you can't pop your own stuff anymore. Destroy that face-up monster. If you do, you take damage equal to its attack, and then if you took that damage and the duel hasn't ended yet, your opponent then takes the damage. You can only use this once per turn. They like tripled the card text on this thing. The card's still okay. Using it on your opponent's turn only doesn't really affect its use very much, and only popping opponent's monsters, you know, okay, that's no big deal. Popping your own monster is super gimmicky and cheesy, and most of the time it's probably a bad play anyway, so that's again not super super bad. But what really changed the way the card worked was it makes you take the damage first and then your opponent, as opposed to the same time, so that if it would cause a draw, it no longer causes a draw, it just loses you the duel. And then I think that once per turn clause doesn't really hurt it that much, but again, it's just one more thing to limit the way the card works. Next. Here's a card I forgot was in this set. Reasoning. Your opponent declares a monster level, then you excavate cards until you hit a monster that can be normal summoned or set. If the monster that you hit during your excavation is the same level as the one that was declared, it gets sent to the graveyard along with all the other excavated cards. If it was a different level and your opponent guessed wrong, then it gets to be special summoned to your side of the field, and then everything else, again, just goes to the graveyard. The cool thing about this card is it's pretty much a free monster if you're playing a deck that has a bunch of different levels in it, because your opponent is most likely not going to guess right. Decks like Cosmo abuse this card pretty well because your opponent would have to call, they would probably be forced to call 8s just so you don't get a Dark Destroyer, but then you're most likely just going to hit one of the other monsters anyway, so they're either going to get a monster or they're going to put Dark Destroyer in the grave, and that's really not a big problem. And the fact that you mill every single spell, trap, or monster that can't be normal summoned or set to the graveyard until you hit one that can be normal summoned or set means you can thin your deck like crazy with this card, and any graveyard spell activations or trap activations can get their shtick going, so that's also an added utility of this card. That's probably why it's a 1. Not every deck can run it, but decks that can run it, I always think it's an interesting option. At a 1-off, it's a fun little tech, and if it does cheese you out a monster, it cheeses you out a monster. Here we go. Here's Gravekeeper's real entry on the list, Royal Tribute. Royal Tribute is a normal spell card that is currently at 1 on the Forbidden Limit list, and it has the following devastating effect. If you control Necrovalley, both players discard all monsters from their hands to the graveyard. Go away. The funny thing about this card is not only does it need Necrovalley to even work, it combos extremely well with Necrovalley, meaning that any of those things that your opponent was forced to discard don't get to use any of their effects. So that's like, yeah. This card's an absolute blowout against any monster-heavy deck, and it's pretty much the reason why you play Gravekeepers nowadays, even to this point, because sure, Necrovalley does stun a lot of decks, but the deck doesn't have a lot of big power plays. It tends to be more slow stun control, so in order to actually really put in the hurt on an opponent's deck, you need cards like Royal Tribute to just bam, smack them in the face and get rid of any strategy that that deck would have, so then you can just kind of mash into them with your Gravekeepers. It's a really awesome card, and I really wish it was at a higher thing on the list, because I would really like to see this at 2, just so the Gravekeepers could be an anti-meta deck again. Because I think with 2, I think that deck would actually be a decent choice. Number 4 is good old Book of Moon. Oh yeah. Book of Moon's a quick play spell card that reads, target one, face up monster on the field, turn that monster to face down defense position. That's it. The cool thing about Book of Moon is it might be one of the most versatile tech cards and utility cards that we have in this game. Being quick play means you can chain it to anything that is spell speed 2 or lower, making it a pretty disruptive card, and the fact that when you put a monster face down, weird things can happen. Things can lose target depending on their wording, and you can like avoid certain effects or make other effects fizzle. There's just tons of weird interactions that occur when a monster is booked. And it's this interaction which makes this card so valuable, and I really wish this card was at more than 1 on the ban list, because frankly, it is just super useful, but it is a neg 1 for all intents and purposes, so I do think it, because of that, is inherently balanced, so I would really like to see it at a higher than 1. With the advent of Link monsters, this card actually did get a bit of a weird, it's not really a power boost, but a more lateral shift in what it can do. Sure, you can't put a Link monster face down, so it, there's a whole new summoning mechanic that this card absolutely can't affect, but if your opponent is forced to put something like Emic Saber Invoker into their extra deck zone first, and then mill and then detach and summon like Thousand Blades so they can get their Clown Blade thing going, or something like that, where they need to make an XC first, you can hit it with Book of Moon, and then they can't go into their extra deck at all because they can't link with a monster that is face down. You can't really do anything with a face down monster except fusion summon, and it'd be unlikely that they could do that at that point. So you might not be able to use it against Link monsters, but you can just absolutely shut your opponent out of using their extra deck at all if they happen to pendulum something there or something like that. So I love Book of Moon. I'd like to see it at 2 at least. Span card time. Metamorphosis. Tribute 1 monster. Special summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck with the same level as that tributed monster. Here you go, all you GOAT players. This is the reason why this card and Thousand Eyes Restrict were on the ban list for so long, because people were tributing GOAT tokens off a scapegoat in order to special summon a Thousand Eyes Restrict. Unlike instant fusion, the monster doesn't die during the end of the turn, so you don't have to actually be forced to do something with it. You can just let it sit, like Thousand Eyes Restrict, for instance. But it doesn't have the added utility that instant fusion does, where the instant fusion is actually considered a proper fusion summon. This is a special summon from the extra deck, meaning that if it goes to the graveyard for some other reason, you can't summon it back with something like Monster Reborn. Which is a shame, and is actually, I think, why I don't really think Metamorphosis really needs to be on the ban list anymore. There isn't a ton of great targets for it. With the extra deck link zone thing that we have now, you know, sacking a guy to clog up your extra deck zone with 1 fusion monster, it's probably not great. Hell, even in my singleton tournament, I got like Magical Scientist on board, and normally with Magical Scientist you could just pay 1,000 life points and keep summoning fusion monsters until you run out of life points. But because of the new link mechanic, you actually had to make like Skull Deet or something first, and then you actually can effectively use them. So even cards that are as broke as Magical Scientist under the new mechanic are kind of clumsy under the new mechanic. So Metamorphosis is completely not different. The only thing cool about Metamorphosis is you do have things that like are decent fusion targets. Like, I think you can summon Exterio off of this, and I know you can summon Last Warrior from another planet with this thing as well, which is the whole reason why that Waking the Dragons card is even seeing some hype, because there is some decent fusion monsters that you can just cheese out and have good effects. But again, I don't think that is a reason why that's a reason for this to be on the ban list. I don't know. I think all that's too cheesy and inconsistent for it to really matter. At 1, I don't know, no one would care. Now here's a card that should never even seen the light of day, and I can't make a good excuse of why it should come off the ban list, because it absolutely shouldn't come off the ban list. Mirage of Nightmare. During your opponent's standby phase, draw cards until you have 4 cards. During your standby phase, randomly discard cards equal to the number that you drew, or your entire hand if you don't have enough. Now you might say, wow, Dave, sure you get to draw up to 4 cards if you had no hand, and then during your opponent's standby phase, you just go +4 like a BAMF. But that's super slow. You're waiting an entire turn, and you know, ew. And yeah, I would agree that it's actually quite slow, and being a continuous spell means it's easy to get off the field before it even resolves, but that's also the reason why it's so damn good. People were figuring out that you could just draw 4 with this thing and then get an MST, so during like your draw phase, drop the MST, pop this thing before, you know, you are forced to discard for it, and you get to keep the rest of the cards that you grab, meaning that it is at best now a +3, which is still probably one of the most powerful draw cards we have. Not only that, but if you have some sort of cheesy deck like Dark Worlds or something like that, I'm sure, because that's not cost, it'd be a resolution, so I'm pretty sure like there's tons of decks that would just absolutely abuse the whole draw, discard, 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 draw, discard, discard, discard. You'd lead to some really dumb loops and things like that. I'm pretty sure the card is way too broken to be ever brought back, simply because what it allows you to do, not necessarily what people would actually use it for. So it's really rough to make an argument for it, even though it is a bit fragile and slow. Alright, we got a couple honorable mentions this time because there are some really cool cards that could make it on the list. Number 1 might be one of the most broken cards in the game, but it's too good I couldn't put on the list. Shape Snatch. Oh my god. No, I'm just kidding. The card I was actually talking about is Moisture Creature. Oh, the name on this thing. Alright, I'm kidding. Maiden of the Aqua, gotcha! Oh yeah, she's an honorable mention only because she somehow got past the censors going to the TCG. I don't know how she didn't get the standard TCG breast production, because damn, that's like half the card. It's just stacked. Nah, alright, fine. First honorable mention is Reckless Greed. I couldn't put it on the list because, I don't know, all the other cards were just really good, and these lists keep getting hogged by a bunch of ban cards. But Reckless Greed is a solid draw card, especially if you see multiple of it at the same time. Normal trap card, you draw 2 cards, but then you skip your next 2 draw phases. However, that doesn't stack. So if you flip 2, you get to draw 4 and only skip 2 draw phases. So that's really neat. Certain decks like Paleo can still run this card pretty efficiently. I don't know if they even do anymore, but they could. It's a trap card, it's a draw card, it's everything you could want in that deck. But every once in a while, you know, if you don't get those 2 cards, you're just like, and the duel doesn't end anyway. You're like, it's like your opponent doesn't, like your opponent couldn't even game you. So you have to like have this weird like suboptimal next turn. I don't know, it's awkward if you don't see more than one. The other one's Don Zalug. I don't know, what do you call them? Those burglar things came out in this set too, and they saw some competitive success back in the day, so I figured I would at least mention them, although nowadays I'm pretty sure the best way that deck could win is give your opponent the Scorpion Burglars card, that's what all of them are on it, and then crash a bunch of tokens into it, take a bunch of damage, and force your opponent to mill all your jackpot 7s and declare an instant victory. That's like super cheese. But I figured, you know, hell, I'll put their leader on here just so I mention him, because otherwise it would be a little weird, because they did see some competitive success. And the fabled number 1, also one of the better banned cards that we have, Trap Dust Shoot. I mean, I guess Chick is on this card, right? Is that his name? So I guess he could have been the Dark Scorpion Burglars dude representation, but this doesn't actually have much to do with that deck. Well, wait, did they make you discard stuff? I don't remember. I really don't remember how that deck plays. Activate if your opponent only has 4 or more cards in their hand. Look at their hand, select one of their monster cards, and return it to the deck. Oh yeah. At first glance, this card doesn't seem super great. That activation condition can be a little steep. And yes, it can late game if we're both kind of in a top decking scenario. This thing's an awful top deck, because not only is it a trap, but you can't even use it if you could. Just even if it was a spell. But it's that early game that just puts this right in line with Delinquent Duel, Confiscation, and the Forceful Sentry in that like quadrifecta of just cards that make you look at your opponent's hand and deal with their resources before they even have a chance to play. The coolest thing about this card was, because it was a trap and because it has that seemingly difficult activation condition, it didn't get hit with the ban list as early as the other ones did. So I'm pretty sure this was one of the GOAT cards, because yeah, this was a GOAT card, right? Because yeah, it's just super solid, and early in the duel, your opponent's probably going to have 4 cards, especially if you're playing a format like GOAT where you have Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, right? I gotta get up to date on my GOAT ban list. They reference it too much. Needless to say, this card's super solid early duel, and it's probably one of the best cards in the set. I had to kind of weigh my options between this and Mirage of Nightmare, but I think this one is most certainly the most powerful and saw the most competitive success. So anyway, guys, let me know in the comments below what you guys think of Pharaonic Fanny Guardian, and be sure to explain why Maiden of the Aqua is best girl. And remember, guys, if you don't troll the meta, who will? I will see you guys next time for, oh, what the hell is the next set? Oh god, I'm trying to use the mouse in my lap. Order of set release wiki. I'm gonna say Magician's Force? I feel like it's Magician's Force, which is a cool set. I like Magician's Force. It is Magician's Force! Woo! Yeah! So join me next time for Magician's Force. And remember, guys, if you don't troll the middle, who will? I'll see you guys next time. I feel like I already said that.
You are now under the control of my Millennium Rod. You will subscribe to the channel or watch the latest vid, and if not, you could watch whatever the this is.